you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Evil will return to the people, and so long as men die, liberty will never perish. Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you and slay you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, or what to feel, who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle, use you as cannon fodder. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men, machine men, with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are not cattle, you are men. You are men.
Welcome to the Rock Worldwide Show here on WSHO Sunshine 800 AM. Yes, indeedy, I am your host, Trey Roberts. Glad you're joining us on what looks like it's going to be a pretty beautiful day today in the Big Easy. Glad you're joining us, whether you're listening to us on Facebook or Twitter or, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or on radio at WSHO 800 AM. Wherever you may be listening to us, we thank you for joining us today. Got a big show planned for you. Got a lot to get to, so let's jump right into this. By the way, if you want to call, you can call 504-527-0800. And the best way to get in touch with the program, though, is to go to WSHO.com and jump down the page just a little ways and jump into the chat room there. And you can interact with us live, pretty much in real time. Or you can also, as stated earlier, you can go to Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, watch us there live, and comment in real time as well. That being said, let's jump into this. So, busy week as usual with the news and everything going on. A lot of things to commemorate. This week was a pretty juicy news week. Don't know if you know it or not, but this past week was the 10-year anniversary. Was the 10-year anniversary of the dating app Tinder, and there were some really good pieces by people like Jordan Peterson, Catherine D, Emma Camp. These people. There was also a symposium on the subject of Tinder's legacy, and if you take some time and think about where we are as a society 10 years into this thing called Tinder, you're going to realize that there's a lot of digital dating apps. It's created a lot of losers. So if you don't really understand or know what Tinder's about, take some time and try to figure out what's going on. Also, if you get a chance, go look at the Jesse Singal piece. We talked about this last week. Jesse Singal wrote a piece on basically the autopsy of a racism sham at BYU. Rachel Richardson was the only black starter on Duke University's women's volleyball team, and she leveled a shocking accusation last month when she said she was inundated with racial slurs at a match at a Mormon school at BYU, and the press ran with it, but there's no evidence that it happened. And there's a real good piece. If you listen to podcasts, go listen to the Honestly podcast with Barry Weiss and Dr. Casey Means. She is a Stanford-trained doctor who left the traditional medical system behind to tackle the 300-pound question of, pun intended by the way, why are Americans so fat? Phenomenal podcast. If you get a chance, go listen to it. It's the Honestly podcast. And shout out to everyone over at Common Sense Media, which is also a part of Barry Weiss's media conglomerate. So let's get into what else happened this week. Welcome to the seventh circle of hell. If you only read one thing this weekend, there is a sprawling investigative opus on the sordid saga of the Hunter Biden laptop. Andrew Rice and Olivia Nuzzi basically wrote a piece, and I want you to imagine putting Burn After Reading, The Maltese Falcon, Boogie Nights, and like the Parallax View into a blender. Okay, this is kind of like how the story ends up playing out. Now, we all know the New York Post first began publishing things when it found began publishing things that it found on the laptop in October of 2020, just before the election. And that's when big brothers of big tech, as we all know, tried to squash it. Right out of the gate, the story metastasized into something much bigger. It became a question of censorship and the relationship between tech, the press, and the Democratic Party. This was the hard drive that broke the media. New York Post reporters quibbled over who had to put their name on the story. Everyone from Brian Seltzer to NPR kept flip-flopping on whether it was real or whether they should even cover it, or if somehow covering it made it real. Glenn Greenwald ended up leaving the company that he founded, The Intercept, over the entire thing. And there's a lot of people that still feel pretty conflicted about this. Some right-wingers, people like you and me, we know, this is something that we've been harping on for a while. And people who don't think like us find us talking about the Hunter Biden laptop, they find us with some kind of OCD about it. They feel like that we have some kind of obsession with it, that it's some kind of a search for a smoking gun that probably was never going to emerge, and that it just felt like, to a lot of people on the left, it feels like we're just reaching, that we're constantly bringing this thing out. But a lot of us have felt gaslit over the entire story, and people are now starting to understand why we've felt gaslit. That despite the sturm and drang of the legacy press, everyone always knew that the laptop was real, and it just took the media years to admit it. And certainly, Hunter's overseas ventures were pretty grimy. But after reading about all the scoundrels involved in peddling this thing and their various motivations, it isn't hard to see why the press was so weary of this story. And so if you get a chance, go read that article. It was pretty amazing. Royal mania in America has reached peak cringe levels. It's perfectly understandable that the Brits are in meltdown mode, because Queen Elizabeth really is the last link to their glorious past. The United Kingdom has been reeling backward. It's been shrinking in on herself for some time now. And so the London media circus around Queen Elizabeth's death, it continues. While the unbelievably long queue to take a glimpse at her coffin lying in state at Westminster Hall snakes for miles along the south bank of the Thames River. But what's our excuse over here in America? I mean, if you walk into a neighborhood, coffee shop, or if you go to one of these little neighborhood newsstands uptown or something, maybe you're just in there trying to get a pack of cigarettes or something. Like, all of the latest issues of magazines that get delivered still, all of their fresh print covers seem to be lamenting the Queen, the Queen, the Queen, Harry Styles, and all this other stuff. It's impossible right now to turn on television, to open a periodical, or look at social media without being assaulted by something that reads like bad satire. The Queen's bees have been informed of her passing, reports Vanity Fair, without a trace of humor or acknowledgement that bees can't be informed of anything. I mean, if only Christopher Hitchens were still here. Buckingham Palace did not respond to a request for comment about who would now be caring for the corgis, wrote the New York Times in a somber live briefing item about dogs, corgis, the Queen's dogs. In Vogue, Annie Leibovitz offered this poignant remembrance, quote, "It was her duty, sitting for photographs, part of what she did," close quote. Oh, okay. It's all really become quite clownish now. Which really kind of reminds me of, there was a piece last year in the Irish Times by Patrick Frenny. And here's a little paragraph from that piece in the Irish Times last year. Here's what it said, quote, "Having a monarchy next door is a little like having a neighbor who's really into clowns and has dubbed their house with clown murals, displays clown dolls in each window, and has an insatiable desire to hear about and discuss clown-related news stories. More specifically for the Irish, it's like having a neighbor who's really into clowns and also your grandfather was murdered by a clown," close quote. So if there's only one place that you can go to escape around-the-clock coverage of this never-ending funeral procession, it's probably going to be your local Irish bar. In the words of Seamus Haney, quote, "Be advised, my passport's green. No glass of ours was ever raised to toast the Queen," close quote. And it really is kind of interesting that a country like ours in the United States of America, who, if you go read the Declaration of Independence, it was basically a single finger salute to the monarchy. And yet we over here in the United States, especially the entertainment media, seem to be just all over the Queen's death, as though a monarch is the thing that we long for somehow. Hillary Clinton this week had a family field trip. This week she was asked by CBS News if she would ever run for president again. Hillary Clinton said, no. But lately, she's been doing something much more alarming than forgetting to go to Wisconsin. She's been wandering around the Greek and Egyptian galleries at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, comparing herself to the statues. In promo material for her new 8-part docuseries, which is called Gutsy, and it's going to appear on Apple TV Plus. Well, and it's about gutsy women. Okay, she strolls through the museum with her daughter Chelsea, who comes to a stop before a gold statuette and whispers, "Diana, goddess of the hunt." And this is what Hillary says in a response. She nods quite sagely, and she says, "Anytime you're in this incredible space, you think about history, and you think about those who are willing to step up and speak out." Paging Mrs. Basil E. Frankwheeler, this is getting a little weird. Democrats are playing hide and seek. On Wednesday, Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman, the Democrat vying to be the state's next junior senator, finally agreed to debate his Republican foe, Mesmet Oz, aka Dr. Oz. Fetterman, you'll recall, suffered a stroke in May and has, since then, pretty much implemented the Biden plan, spending a great deal of time insisting that he'll get better every day while pretty much hiding from reporters. Now, the Fetterman campaign's agreement to take part in the debate on October 25th, more than a month after the voting starts in Pennsylvania, came in the wake of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Washington Post editorializing that If he's not fit to debate, he might not be fit to be a United States senator. Huh, you think? Maybe if he's not fit to go on the campaign trail, he's not fit to be the president of the United States. Just saying. Since returning to the campaign trail, Mr. Fetterman has been halting in his performances, the Post observed. He stammers, appears confused, and keeps his remarks short. He has held no press conferences. Mr. Fetterman acknowledges his difficulties with auditory processing, which makes it hard for him to respond quickly to what he's hearing. He receives speech therapy, and although all of us wish him a speedy, full recovery, but the lingering unanswering questions about his health, underscored by his hesitation to debate, are unsettling. Now, the reason that we down here in good old Louisiana are even talking about this story is because we have a 50-50 Senate right now. The control of the Senate is one of the more important things, as we all have just experienced, with the Senate under the Trump administration getting 3 Supreme Court justices in, and a Republican Senate preventing an Obama nominee to the court. So the Senate and what's going on in the Senate is an important thing. Now, there's a debate brewing about video clips appearing to show Fetterman struggling to speak clearly. Now, he's contending that the clips, which were posted on Twitter and TikTok, that they've been doctored. Quote, the videos include slight edits, such as cutting out the sound of the audience to make it appear as if he had abruptly stopped speaking, NBC News reported. But slight edits can only account for so much, and these clips are inspiring legitimate doubt. So you can watch them actually for yourself. But for now, Fetterman's best hope, not unfounded given polls slightly have him ahead of Oz, is Oz himself. In a pattern that seems to be playing out across America, Democrats' best hope of limiting their losses this election season appears to be the GOP, which has nominated several candidates in the mold of their idol Donald Trump, who have a knack for shooting themselves in the foot. For example, Dr. Oz's Wegner's flap, or Blake Masters in Arizona mysteriously editing his website, or Herschel Walker just being Herschel Walker in Georgia. Lambasting a new climate change law. The former NFL football star recently said, quote, "Don't we have enough trees around here?" Close quote. Oh boy. San Francisco crime just won't quit. It's hard to decide which part of this big new San Francisco Chronicle poll is more shocking. Is it that nearly half of the respondents said that they were victims of theft in the last 5 years? Or is it that roughly a quarter were physically attacked or threatened? I mean, Midtown Manhattan is starting to seem a whole lot nicer. You know, there was a strike that simply wasn't. The federal government officials and railway workers have avoided a strike that would have dealt a blow to the economy less than 2 months before the midterm elections. And it was announced on Thursday. The tentative deal appears to have been mostly hammered out by Labor Department and union higher-ups with a little help from President Joe Biden. One question the twittering class had was, where's Pete? Pete. As in Buttigieg, our transportation secretary. Lefties were wondering whether he was just using his job as a platform to run for the White House again. It's really surprising that throwing the mayor of South Bend into the transportation department, where he spends his time preparing another presidential run, hasn't worked out so well for the nation's transportation. This from Ryan Grimm of The Intercept in a quite snarking voice. The energy crisis is deepening in Europe. In the UK, the new Tory Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is limiting energy bill price hikes for all households for 2 years. And in Germany, plans have been recently announced to delay the phasing out of 2 nuclear power plants. In the Netherlands, people are being asked to shower in under 5 minutes, and on average, the Dutch spend 9 minutes in the shower. Thea Dirks, a music journalist in Amsterdam, told the Wall Street Journal that she's down to showering just once a week for under 5 minutes. Ugh. A third world water crisis is happening right here in America. What's happening in Europe is pretty luxurious compared to what is happening right now to the people of Jackson, Mississippi, and what they've been dealing with. After nearly 7 weeks, their governor lifted the boil water advisory that had been in effect. The city, which is almost 83% black, has nightmarish infrastructure problems. Aging pipes froze last February, cutting off water. When it does run, it often isn't safe for consumption. And speaking of energy cutbacks, what about all those dead oligarchs? So far in 2022, 12 Russian oligarchs have mysteriously and violently met their ends. Most appear to have committed suicide. Some were murdered along with their wives and children. Alexander Subotin was discovered in a shaman's basement outside Moscow, having reportedly died from a drug-induced heart attack, which may have included the typical toad poisoning that was part of the anti-hangover session. The same phenomenon has been reported in China. Maybe the lesson here is there is no such thing as independent wealth in authoritarian regimes. Just wealth that is dependent on the good graces of the powers that be. The great return to office war rages on. Down on Wall Street, the bosses are done asking nicely. Jamie Dimon and DJ David Solomon have been itching to get buttocks back in seats for months, and their ability to corral their own troops was looked at as a weather vane for the future of the great American office. Because if the Gordon Geckos of the world can't get their Bud Foxes back in their cubicles, who can? Solomon has finally got some leverage though. Goldman Sachs expects to start making layoffs soon. And now the troops are scrambling to show that actually they really do want to work. When some showed up to their Lower Manhattan headquarters this week, they discovered that the bosses had put a lid on the free coffee, which had appeared as an early pandemic perk. Quote, "The brass has since determined it doesn't need sweeteners to get people back into the office. Instead, management now believes the threat of getting fired should be more than enough incentive." This according to the New York Post. It was small, but it seems to be a rather delicious revenge. Meanwhile, farther uptown, the New York Times bosses, they were having a complete opposite experience. As I'm studying this week for the show and preparing for the show this week, I read that they tossed out a rather lame pandemic perk. The Times branded lunchboxes and hoped it would get their staffers back to the newsroom. Instead, 1,300 said they wouldn't return until they had an acceptable labor contract. Negotiations with the unions have been dragging on for a long while now, and some are suggesting that a strike could be right around the corner. Planefuls of migrants arrived at Martha's Vineyard this week. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Texas Governor Greg Abbott engaged in a political stunt so shocking, they might really trump Trump. Abbott sent a bus of migrants to the vice president's residence in D.C., while DeSantis chartered 2 planes carrying migrants into the heart of liberal East Coast elitedom, Martha's Vineyard. Larry David and Spike Lee both have homes there, as does Obama. It's where he threw his celebrity-packed 60th birthday bash last summer. At a presser on Thursday, DeSantis said, quote, "We've worked on innovative ways to be able to protect the state of Florida from the impact of Biden's border policies." White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, was right when she called it a cruel, premeditated political stunt that was reckless and just plain wrong. But cruel political stunts sometimes pay off. Just think about Trump's entire first campaign. Or they backfire. Now, DeSantis has his eye on 2024, make no doubt about that. And this will certainly enthrall the base. But who knows how it will play to most Americans? I did have the thought, I told this to my wife, I did have the thought that the idea of taking people who are coming from really bad third world situations and who are coming here mostly because they want a better situation in life, to then take them and just use them as like a political pawn in some kind of game, there is an aspect of it that doesn't feel right. Now, Politico reported that the arrival of the migrants, and there were nearly 4 dozen, including a child in need of medical attention, stunned local officials on the island. Their first night on the island was spent at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church and a parish house in Edgertown. And that's pretty close to Obama's place. He's got a 29.3 acre spot on the waterfront. And it might be cool to use his place for something other than a Hollywood party. Now, if you thought your high school was bad, a front page New York Times investigation into a network of Hasidic schools dotting Brooklyn and the lower Hudson Valley region revealed that the schools failed to teach the children much of anything. 12-year-olds don't know their ABCs. One man said he's never read a secular book until someone gave him green eggs and ham at the age of 28. And teachers have reportedly beaten their male students. This while the schools are showered with gobs of taxpayer dollars. Now, the linchpin of this story is that major New York polls from Bill de Blasio to Andrew Cuomo to current Governor Kathy Hochul to now Mayor Adams did and said nothing for fear of pissing off the Hasidic voting bloc. See, that's how you end up with Adams tweeting a video of himself going down a slide at one of these schools and insisting our education system be culturally sensitive. Asked about the story on Monday, Adams said, "I'm not concerned about the findings of the article," close quote. He later added that any form of corporal punishment is not acceptable. Now, the people over at Common Sense were sort of intrigued by a Twitter thread from Robert Pondicio. He's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and himself a former Bronx public school teacher. He points out that the Times report lacks some critical context, meaning it placed particular emphasis on the fail rates of the yeshivas, but didn't mention that city schools can be just as bad in that regard. He did point to a 2014 study which found that dozens of city schools failed to pass a single black or Hispanic student on state exams for math or reading. Oh look, Facebook is doing something creepy again. The social media giant banned filmmaker Joshua Newton from promoting his Holocaust movie, Beautiful Blue Eyes, because it ran afoul of the social media giant's policy against content that, quote, includes direct or indirect assertions or implications about a person's race, close quote. The reference to blue eyes apparently refers to a key scene in this movie about a child in the movie, Newton, who is the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, told Rolling Stone, quote, "This is the action of haters. And there are sadly many in our society who seek to damage the film in order to trivialize the Holocaust. The cyborgs over at Facebook seem to have learned very little from the global backlash that ensued in 2016 after they banned one of the most important images in the history of photography. The picture of a little girl fleeing a napalm attack in Vietnam that was taken by the Pulitzer Prize winner, Nick Ut. There is a national Adderall shortage. More than 6 in 10 pharmacies are having trouble stocking the ADHD drug, according to a survey last month from the National Community Pharmacist Association. So if you are dealing with ADHD, ADD, BAD, whatever the case may be, if you need some more Adderall, I would suggest stockpiling yours for the long, dark months ahead. Taking a look at some additional stories, one of my favorite biblical scholars, Scott McKnight, has a newsletter that goes out called Meanderings. And Scott currently is working with a cohort, a New Testament context cohort of Doctorate of Ministry, or DMin students. And he has an interesting take. On the Martha Vineyard story that I just mentioned a few moments ago. Planes carrying 50 migrants from Venezuela and Colombia landed unexpectedly at Martha's Vineyard Airport on Wednesday afternoon. Island officials and volunteers quickly rallied to find temporary shelter for the group. We're immigrants, Alace, who said he was from Venezuela, told the Gazette, "We came here because of the situation in our country, for the economy, for work, for lots of things. I came here walking. We went through 10 different countries until we got to Texas. There, a refugee association put us in a plane and told us there would be work and housing here. I feel good despite everything. We spent 4 days in Texas, so it's good to be here." Now, a coalition of emergency management officials, faith groups, nonprofit agencies, and county and town officials were organizing food and shelter for the migrants who spent Wednesday night, as we reported a few minutes ago, at St. Andrew's Church in Edgartown. The Salvation Army, among others, they were the ones providing food. And as word spread of the migrants' plight, a crowd of people, many eager to offer assistance, gathered outside the church. Edgartown Police Lieutenant Chris Dolby urged people not to deliver additional donations. Speaking outside the parish hall Thursday morning, State Rep Dylan Fernandez said the situation was under control, quote, "with law enforcement jumping into action," close quote. People were served breakfast this morning by the parish and served lunch by the school system. We are a community that helps one another, and you can see that here, he said. And there's several other stories. So John Hawthorne has a story that went on. And Fuller, it looks like Fuller Seminary has a new president. So if you're following the Christian academic world, Fuller Seminary is kind of an important seminary in the United States. Bob on books of food. If you live in Central Ohio, the big news there is the Intel groundbreaking. Don't know if you heard about this, but Intel, the computer company, broke ground last Friday, September 9th, 2022. Now, this was made possible in parts by the CHIPS Act, CHIPS Act, which was signed into law recently by President Biden, who spoke at the groundbreaking. The talk is of 10,000 new jobs plus 7,000 construction jobs, and who knows how many other jobs that will be attracted by the presence of this tech giant. Now, everyone speaks how important this is to achieve microchip security, jeopardized by our recent supply chain issues where chips for everything from automobiles to refrigerators, they were in short supply. Now, our area colleges are reshaping curricula to provide the training for the technicians, the programmers, and the engineers that the company will need. This is being made possible by a significant flow of money. It might be questioned why all these chips have become so necessary and ubiquitous in our lives. But what I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is why a similar focus is not being placed on the security and the sustainability of our food supply. Some of us have grown up in a world without chips, but none of us have grown up or can survive long in a world without food. What concerns me is where the food comes from. Like, do you know where the food you ate for breakfast came from beyond like your local grocery store? Because I'll be honest with you, I can't say that I do. But when I've been able to find out, I'm often surprised at the distance that food has traveled to my table and the process that it has undergone in that journey. What I wonder is if we thought about how breakable those complex logistic chains actually are. We tasted something of that with particular products during the pandemic. Recently, some infants, they were left without formula. They needed due to allergies where there was problems at one manufacturing plant. Part of the stopgap was shipping formula from overseas in huge transports. And of course, all of this has a large carbon footprint, from the fertilizer and the farm machinery to the transport, the refrigeration, the processing, and more transport to local groceries. And so I wonder if it's a dangerous assumption that this is always going to work. I was talking to somebody the other day, and I think like an EMP attack is probably one of the scariest scenarios that I could possibly think of. If you think of every single thing that has an electric circuitry to it, in one bomb, all of that stuff going away, nothing with an electrical circuit will work. Not watches, computers, microphones, electricity. I mean, we're talking dark ages within 3 days. We're talking about food spoiling, cars not working. An EMP attack is just horrifying. There was a time when most of our food came from within like 50 miles of our home. And if we lived in the country, as opposed to say a town or a city, much of it actually came from our own land. Even during World War II, victory gardens were popular and people grew a sizable part of their food in their backyard, canning some of it to last through the winter. And since we're talking about food, let me give you some chicken news here. The National Chicken Council, or the NCC, is a special interest group representing the chicken industry in the United States. Now, according to them, chicken is one of the most successful sectors in agriculture. In a little over 50 years, the U.S. broiler industry has evolved from fragmented, locally oriented businesses into a highly efficient, vertically integrated, progressive success story. Now that's their story and they're sticking to it. And they're also paying for it, because for decades, the NCC has consistently ranked near the top of all organizations that have contributed to campaigns or lobbied in Washington. They have spent many millions of dollars to buy the favor of politicians, both Republican and Democrats. And over the years, that investment continues to pay off in various ways. Now, you might have heard of the AG gag laws, a notorious tactic for protecting the interest of industrialized animal farming operations. They do so by criminalizing investigative reporting and whistleblowing activities at farming operations. In effect, these laws criminalize transparency. Many states have tried to pass such laws, and several have succeeded. Still, there's been resistance. In 2015, the U.S. District Court struck down Idaho's AG or Ag gag law on the grounds that it violated constitutionally protected rights of free speech and equal protection. The animal agricultural industry does not want you to know, pun intended, how the sausage gets made. Whenever possible, they attempt to hide their operations from the public. Some of those attempts are surprisingly brazen, their claims so obviously dubious. It's as if they don't expect us to do the most basic research. Now, there is surely only one thing NCC genuinely cares about: maximizing profit for the industry they represent. They're an engine designed to generate money. When they aren't investing in shaping the thinking of politicians, and when they aren't making ludicrous claims about animal welfare, they're often making projections about profitability. In 2021, they looked at the per capita consumption of poultry and livestock since 1965, with projections into 2023. They show that per capita total red meat consumption has decreased 23% in the last 50 years, while per capita total poultry consumption has nearly increased 125% in the same period, from 50.4 pounds to 113.3 pounds. Data from the OECD library show similar trends around the world. Per capita consumption of poultry has increased in countries regardless of whether their economies are designated developed, developing, or least developed. And these trends reflect more than consumer demand. They are the measure of a massive system of violence. And the consequences are not discussed often enough. One of the things that I noticed when I was in Africa is there's like a hierarchy of meats. The first meal that I was served there, when I was given the option to either have chicken, beef, or goat. And so I opted for the chicken. And the chicken was so small, I got a leg quarter. And the leg quarter was so small. I mean, I've never seen a chicken thigh with so little meat on it. But I realized that like these, the poultry industry in places like East Africa, they don't have opportunities to like pump these chickens full of steroids and growth hormones. They don't have the antibiotics that go into making these chickens grow faster and healthier and bigger for our consumption. So it kind of weirded me out a little bit that you had these little baby chickens and really not a whole lot of meat. And then I just wasn't sure what part of the cow I was going to get if I ordered beef. So I ended up going with goat because for them, goat is their delicacy. It's their top meat. And all the butchers in places like East Africa are legally required to be halal certified. In other words, run by Muslims. So I felt like, Islamic kosher was going to be a healthier way if I was going to eat meat. And I kind of fell in love with goat. But it's kind of weird. If you go look at how these animals are treated, it's kind of difficult to look at whether it's veal or pork or poultry. To see a lot of times the conditions that these animals live in. And I get it. Like, we're going to kill them and we're going to eat them. So I get that. But there is something very gross. Something, I'm not going to say inhumane because they're not human. But massive factory farming is something just doesn't seem right about it. And I don't know how to improve it. I've not looked into it. I'm just saying that there's the way we get our food, and most of us, we don't really think about how we get our food. Looping in education, is that a good idea or not? Well, you might say, well, what is looping? Well, the practice of looping, or pairing teachers with one class of students from grade to grade, is sometimes informally used to address school staffing issues. But research shows that there are benefits to the students who keep their teacher for more than 1 year. Austin, Texas-based math teacher Mark Rogers has been looping for about a decade, starting when he agreed to continue teaching his 8th grade students the following year as 9th graders. Quote, "Everybody knew everybody's names. I had all the parents' contact information. I knew what their strengths were. I knew how to help them. So we just basically squeezed in an extra 2 to 4 weeks of instruction in that year just because I already knew them. Looping has been used in American education and in American schools for decades. As with Roger's first experience, most looping is unintentional as students move through grade levels and schools need to fill teaching slots. But some education professionals believe looping provides benefits for students and should be used more intentionally. The Eurocentric bias in church history or the history of Christianity, this is something that Scott McKnight writes a lot about. And I don't, this is another one of those things that in seminary, personally being in seminary right now, pursuing another master's degree, this time in mental health counseling, I have to take certain numbers of theological courses. And seeing some of, very little, but seeing what feels like sort of the woke trends happening in seminary, I try to push back in the class just if for no other reason than for these professors to sort of hear their arguments and how really lame they are. Now, there's a broader Christianity that's known, especially among specialists of various sub-disciplines of Eastern Christian studies, the Armeniologists, the Coptologists, the Syriacists. And yet, despite a few attempts to integrate it with the history of Christianity discipline, like people like Philip Jenkins, the broader public and the teaching of history of Christianity in Anglophone universities and seminaries largely continues to follow the exclusionary contours of Western civilization, as if that were a real historical phenomenon rather than a white supremacist fiction. Books by historians of American and Western European Christianity get labeled History of Christianity, simpliciter. Books by historians of Asian or African Christianity after late antiquity get labeled by subdiscipline and generally not reviewed in church history journals, nor read by historians of Western Christianity, nor by a broader Western public, though sometimes a diaspora community does. The scholarly discipline of the history of Christianity continues to perpetuate the imbalance in global coverage of the Christian religion. The ProQuest dissertation database records almost 3 times as many dissertations about just the Franciscan movement as about the entire almost 2 millennia old Syriac tradition that spanned from Jerusalem to India and China. A proportion maintained if one only considers the past 5 years. So you had about over 1,100, almost 1,150 articles, dissertations about the Franciscan movement, and you only had about 423 in the Syriac tradition. But even in the last 5 years, you had 187 to 60, respectively. Now, to be clear, the problem here is not the large number. There's still a lot to learn about the Franciscans. But how much more about an entire branch of Christianity that's spread over a continent? Now, some will inevitably ask whether these imbalances are even a problem. I mean, is the history of Christianity Eurocentric just because European varieties of the faith are more important historically? Scott McKnight says no. I would say maybe. But the rediscovery of like Aristotle, the Galenic medicine, and other Greek classics in medieval Western Europe was mediated by Arab-speaking Muslims and Jews who received Aristotle from Arab-speaking Christian translators. Most notably, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, working in Baghdad. Yet, very few non-specialists today have heard his name, though it was known in the Latinized form Johannitus to medieval Latin authors themselves. There has been a convenient forgetting. I just think that when we study history, this is the greatest example of the prosperity of where we live in the times that we live. We don't even realize how good we have it. And the way we don't know is because we think that we can, first of all, we have the privilege and the ability to study whatever the heck we want to study. And if you're interested in studying something about someone, about a particular period of time, do so. Be intellectually curious. Continue your education. But our kids have only so much time in school. There are people who spend their entire adult lifehood, their entire adulthood life, rather, trying to study one particular vein of a discipline and never really come to full mastery of it, although they come close. And so arguing about what we should or shouldn't study in history, what students should and shouldn't know in history, especially seminarians, how about we let them just become interested in things and let them study those things? But here's what would happen. Professors would have to step away from the podium and not think that what they want to teach is the most important thing, and allow the students to sort of, especially we're talking at like some of the most advanced levels of education. We're not talking about elementary school, junior high, high school. We're not even talking in your undergrad program. We're talking about postgraduate school. Let me jump in the chat room here at WSHO.com. Robert said, have several friends who met their wives and husbands online. Not sure how I feel about that. Robert, I would agree. I know a couple of people that are, in fact, married today and met online. Now, I think there's a difference, though, if you meet like at Match.com versus Tinder. Tinder is like a hookup website where people are not necessarily looking for long-term relationship, whereas Match, you're sort of looking for a life partner. You're looking for somebody possibly to start dating seriously, monogamously, and then eventually go on to marry. Signe says, it's not just Hunter, it's the entire Biden clan that's a den of thieves. Agreed. David NM says, Hillary minus Chelsea equals creepy. I would say Hillary minus Chelsea equals creepy. Hillary plus Chelsea equals creepy. Hillary times or divided by Chelsea is creepy. She's just a creepy lady. Agreed. Robert said, I don't think it's great. The Dems don't know how to respond. The Democrat Party right now knows that they cannot run on anything that they've done. And they don't have any good ideas, because to put forth any ideas that would actually be helpful would be to put forth the ideas that would ultimately be labeled as Republican. So they are going to look for the racist stuff. They're going to look for, they're going to look for all the other things that basically get in the way so that they have a chance at the midterms. And the Republicans seem to be doing a good job of shooting themselves in the foot. Robert also said all Republican states should do the same thing, and I'm guessing what he means by that is, he means they should send the immigrants to these sanctuary cities in blue states. It does seem as though that's what they're going to be doing. All right. Hey, by the way, if you have not had the chance, Uncle Tom 2, An American Odyssey, is out. I've seen it twice. Phenomenal. But like, there's a couple of documentaries that I would highly recommend. A couple of them are free. A couple of them you have to pay for. But all of them are absolutely must-see streaming TV. Number one, Ma'afa 21. M-A-A-F-A. Ma'afa 21. It's on YouTube. It's free. Go watch that today. Okay? Ma'afa 21. Also, go check out No Guns for Negroes. It's about a 20-minute documentary, a little over 20 minutes maybe. No Guns for Negroes. Phenomenal documentary. Uncle Tom 1, the original Uncle Tom documentary by Larry Elder. Go check that out. And once you watch that, you're going to want to pay for and see Uncle Tom 2. It's out now. Go to uncletom.com and you can watch that. You can either buy a DVD or you can buy it to be able to stream it. And it looks like, spoiler alert, Uncle Tom 2, at the end, there will be an Uncle Tom 3. In Uncle Tom 2, by the way, I like the additions that they made. They brought in more Dr. Vodi Bakum. They brought in more Jesse Lee Peterson. They included, who else did they include? They included Colonel Alan West. And they've got the voice of the late Herman Cain in it. They've got a little bit of Thomas Sowell in it. So Uncle Tom 2 takes, and it's altogether different than the original Uncle Tom. If you've seen that documentary from a couple of years ago. Let's see here. Looking in the chat room on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. Hello to those watching live. Thank you for joining us. We're coming very quickly to the end of our program today. I appreciate you joining us as we did that. Just taking a quick look. I'm going to go quickly to the Drudge Report. Let's see real quick just what's happening in the world in these final minutes. DeSantis smashes fundraising record. Trump now openly embracing QAnon. Again warns unrest if indicted. Team claimed boxes at Mar-a-Lago only news clippings. Justice Department asks appeals court to block MAGA judge ruling. Newsom challenges DeSantis to debate. Border battles escalate. Garland faces stormy waters over investigation. So, interesting things going on right now. Blake Masters has a 21% chance of winning. Peter Thiel looks like he's losing Arizona. And candidates really don't seem to be thrilled right now of having rallies with the Don. As we stated, Fetterman is facing health questions, but is attempting to boost his public schedule. Other than that, 40 seasons. Pat Sajak, is that amazing? Pat Sajak is eyeing retirement, but he is also entering 40 seasons as the host of Wheel of Fortune. It's pretty amazing. Let's see. World's most advanced humanoid denies plot to take over the world. Biden quietly steps up effort to close Gitmo. Singer Arlo Parks cancels tour due to, that's right, debilitating mental health issues. And CNN looks like they did some Don Lemon shuffle. They're moving him from primetime television. Looks like they're moving him into the morning edition. So he'll be out as soon as possible. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that'll do it for us. Thank you for joining us here on the Rock Worldwide Show. Remember to oppose progressivism wherever it rears its ugly head. Illuminate the light of truth. We'll see you next time.